But I wanted to kind of maybe celebrate some of the characters, and I was thinking of maybe someone I've always enjoyed, someone like, for instance, Mark Hillelay, for instance. He's probably going to be immortalised because of his famous comment when he was asked to define what made Fianna Fáil different to every other party, and he said Fianna Fáil is the party that eats its dinner in the middle of the day. So, but I suppose there's a lot of stories about him, and I suppose one of my favourites goes back to the 1980s when he was an MEP, and he was at a conference in Brussels for a 5-day conference on European integration, I think. And the story is told that he went down to breakfast one morning, and he went over to this table, and he recognised that there were 3 French politicians there, and they were having their nice continental breakfast, and he came over with his big Irish fry and sat down, and each of them said to him, bon appetit. And Mark got up and shook hands with each of them and said, Mark Hillelay, Mark Hillelay, Mark Hillelay. And then this went on for the next 3 days, and unfortunately the last day Mark had to go home early. I think there was a common meeting in Clare Galway or somewhere that he had to be home for. But on the 5th day, Garth Fitzgerald was there, and Garth was Taoiseach at the time. So he went down over to where the table that Mark had been sitting at, sat down with his breakfast, and when he saw the 3 French politicians eating, he said bon appetit, and each of the 3 French politicians stood up, shook hands with Garth and said Mark Hillelay, Mark Hillelay, Mark Hillelay.
What did Garth say?
Garth was very bemused, which is not the first time I think in his career Garth has been a little bit bemused, but he took it in good grace apparently.
Do you know any of these politicians personally?
I would know. I know Vincent, someone who spends a lot of time in the company of politicians.
I don't spend a lot of time in politics.
Well, they're on your show, I think.
They ensure that.
quite a bit. So some of the people I would have known, I suppose, being from Roscommon, one of the people I would have known quite well would have been the late Sean Doherty, for instance, and
he was a bundle of laughs too.
He was actually a great character, and actually, strangely enough, the first time I met him was not in Roscommon, but in of all places in Lourdes. This was about 8 years ago. I looked around the Basilica. The first person I saw in Lourdes was Sean Doherty. So he was a larger than life sort of man. But I suppose one was that he had great wit, and he was very, very sharp, very quick. I suppose you might remember in 1989 when he lost his seat in the Dáil to Tom Fox, the hospital candidate. Brian Farrell did an interview with him live from the Con Centre in the Hyde in Roscommon, and he asked him, why did you lose the election, Brian? Sean. Brian asked, and Sean, without blinking an eye, said, I didn't get enough votes, Brian.
Called, will I name him? Sean Sherwin. He was an independent TD, and he was never a member of any political party as far as I know, but he was Lord Mayor of Dublin 1 year in the 1950s. And the famous film actress Mae West came to town, and you remember the great lines of Mae West, and she was leaving the Mansion House, having made an official call in the Mansion House. And as she was leaving, she said to Sean Sherman, who was a very timid little fellow wearing a hat and scared of his wife, who was a formidable lady. And he said to her, she said to him, well, come up and see me sometime. This was just before Easter. And he said, I can't, it's Lent. And she said, no, come up and see me when you get it back.
God, mind you, it's not that long ago that Bertie lost the head with some of his Fianna Fáil parliamentary party people. There was a lot of unrest at the time, and he warned them that he really wanted to say that he wouldn't tolerate any cabals. He warned them he'd tolerate no kebabs in the parliamentary party.
And this was before Joe Higgins.
the other guy, of course,
so there were always kebabs in Fianna Fáil.
They had the kebabs in the middle of the day, not the head.
Yeah, the kebab.
Then there was the politician, of course, who later made it to Leinster House, and wants to get back from what I hear, but he was at a meeting of Cork County Council one day, and he was very concerned about the way multinational companies were taking over the entire Munster seaside, and he said that the multinationals were spreading their testicles all over.
There was a famous scene, a very funny scene that Dáil this would have been in 1982, I think. Oh no, 81. 81. It was Jean Fitzgerald from Cork TD was appointed Minister for Finance. He had previously been Minister for Labour, and he was appointed Minister for Finance by Charlie Haughey. This was after Michael Kennedy, who had been Minister for Finance from December 1979 to the end of 1980. He went off to Brussels to become European Commissioner, and Jean Fitzgerald was appointed Minister for Finance. And people will remember Jean was speaking Cork accent, and terrible husky little voice, and he was at a meeting of European finance ministers, and the Irish economy was in dire shape at the time. Absolutely dire. We were the worst in Europe by far on every score. And he came back and he issued a statement. This is Jim Fitzgerald, issued a statement to the effect that at the meeting of finance ministers, he had warned them against the dangers of overreacting to the problem at the expense of unemployment. And John Kelly, who was the late John Kelly, who was then on the Fine Gael front bench, inquired of Jean in the Dáil. Could I inquire from the Minister of Finance, when he issued this sonorous warning to the finance minister, say, of Germany, Germany was a growth rate of 4% last year and unemployment rate of 2% compared with our 14%, and an inflation rate of 3% compared with ours of 12%. What did the finance minister of Germany say when he issued this warning? And he said, I can tell you they were all very impressed by the fact that I issued, and I say it again, I make no apology for it, I issued the warning that under no circumstances should they overreact to the problems of inflation at the expense of unemployment. And poor John Kelly wound him up and wound him up. It was a hilarious scene.
There was also the famous remark of the late Frank Klusky when Charles Haughey announced his director of elections for one of those elections in the early 80s. Frank Klusky wasn't too impressed, and he says, there's confidence for you.
There's a famous story told by Frank Klusky in relation during the period of 1973-77 coalition government, the Fine Gael Labour coalition government. Frank Klusky was kept out of the cabinet, much to his chagrin, and Michael O'Leary was made Minister for Labour at the time. And Michael was always late for every meeting and thoroughly, completely disorganised. And Frank Klusky, along with his advisor, a guy called Tony Browne, were walking along the Dáil corridor one morning, and Michael O'Leary came busting along, hair all over the place, shirt out, carrying out reams of papers, and obviously very late. I should have told you also that Michael O'Leary had a very competent civil servant who later became Secretary General of some department or other, a guy called Kevin Boller, looking after him, and Kevin Boller cleaned up after him, picked up his papers after him, told him where he should go, how he should sit, how he should hold his knife and fork, a lot. But I hope the listeners won't mind the story. But Michael was bustling along the corridor, obviously late for a meeting, and he had forgotten to do up his fly that morning, and the Klusky and himself just barely bade hello to each other as they passed, and then Klusky said to Tony Browne, it's obvious that Mr. Bonner is not on duty this morning.
The same Michael O'Leary, by the way, said of Frank Klusky's love of travel. Frank liked to travel on these parliamentary trips, and he once remarked that when Frank got within a mile of Dublin Airport, he went rigid with excitement.